Hi, folks. Aaron Dorr here with the American Firearms Association, Director of State Operations, joined with Chris, who usually works in Washington, D.C. But, guys, we have a very urgent update for AFA members today, especially if you live in South Dakota. You know, as everyone knows, the idea of the Second Amendment Preservation Act has been exploding across the country in Red America because we know that by passing SAPA, we have a line in the sand to block the enforcement of much of federal tyranny when it comes to Biden's gun control agenda. And this bill that we're talking about today in South Dakota it sounds like it's the same thing, but as you're about to hear, it's very different. And so we're going to discuss this bill today, and we're asking everybody, especially if you're in South Dakota, to hit the link below and contact the House Public Safety Committee and tell them to either A, adopt our amendment on this bill or strike it down completely. Chris, before we even discuss what this bill does, sometimes we have to kill bills in order to get a real bill passed. And we're open to doing that if we have to here in South Dakota.
Yeah, that happens all the time, especially at the state level with gun rights legislation. There's always moderates, there's anti-gun Democrats, people that live in those suburban areas like around Minnehaha County that they want to be able to campaign at election time as being pro-gun, but they do everything behind the scenes to either water bills down or to actually get them to stop. And then if they can't stop them from moving forward, they interject or they introduce watered down legislation that totally guts the entire either intent or enforcement of the legislation. And that's exactly what we're hearing might be the case, whether it's nefarious or how it happened. That is the condition of this bill that we're looking at here in South Dakota right now.
I think what AFA did in Missouri last year was a groundbreaking landmark legislative success when we passed in our state affiliate, the Missouri Firearms Coalition passed the Second Amendment Preservation Act. That concept now is being emulated, which is what we want to see happen all across the country. AFA affiliate programs, the ones I'm directing for AFA, are doing that right now in 6 or 8 or 9 different states as we're speaking here today. But what we're seeing in South Dakota is a lot different than that. And a quick recap, what real SAPA legislation does, the bill that we wrote and passed in Missouri, is it says that state law enforcement agencies have to enforce state law when it comes to firearms, ammunition, and accessories. It's pretty simple. State cops, state budgets, state sovereignty, state gun laws. We want our state cops to enforce those state laws because we don't want them to be a mere appendage of the Department of Justice. And what Biden is hoping he can do is pass executive action-based gun control and then sit back and laugh his ass off while red states are forced to enforce that tyranny. And so what SAPA simply says is, you might try and do it here, you might try to enforce your tyranny here, but you will not be allowed to force us to enforce your tyranny here. That, in a nutshell, is SAPA. But Chris, the other part is the enforcement, the teeth you mentioned a moment ago. What makes Missouri's law incredible was the civil penalties. Chris, why don't you describe what that is quick?
Well, it's really important to kind of remember here, if the goal behind this Second Amendment Preservation Act, this 10th Amendment based legislation, is to try to prevent government from becoming too controlling, it's very important that the laws that get passed do not rely on government to protect you from government. And so what it simply does is it allows anybody whose rights are being infringed or being attacked, it allows them to go right into civil court and bypass the criminal process where the government has to defend you. It gives you standing to go after them in court and bring suit against them anytime they violate your gun rights.
And so the Missouri law that we passed has a $50,000 civil penalty built into it because we know in Missouri that St. Louis, Kansas City, Springfield, Columbia, whatever, would ignore it. We know in Iowa City, Sioux City, Des Moines, the Quads would ignore it. And we know that there are tyrants in South Dakota as well. Whether it's Sioux Falls, whether it's out in Rapid, whether it's some small town somewhere in between off of I-90, what we've seen over the last year and a half with the lockdowns in particular is there is a little bit of dictatorship in all kinds of people in levels of government. And so we have to have teeth in this bill. There's this quote that was sent to me last night, Chris, from James Madison. I just have to read it. The quote from Madison was, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself." And sometimes, as we've seen, our government is not able to control itself. That's what the teeth in SAPA's law is all about. So that's what SAPA does. State cops enforce state laws. If they violate that, there are teeth via civil penalties that we, the people, enforce. Sadly, in South Dakota, the bill being considered right now in Pierre is a major divergence from that. And we're going to discuss this here momentarily. And we're going to urge again anybody watching, especially in South Dakota, to contact the Public Safety Committee and ask them to either take AFA's amendment and fix this bill, or B, kill it and come back to the drawing board with our assistance next session. Chris?
Yeah, it's really important that people act on this very quickly, because this legislation is moving through the process right now. There's committee hearings happening on this legislation, and if we don't get this fixed now before it gets too far in the process, what happens is that if you get a bad law on the books, it's very hard to come back and change it later. It's not one of those situations where, well, we'll just pass it and then we'll see what's in it. No,
Right.
we cannot afford to let that kind of stuff happen. And there's a lot on the line here, not just only in South Dakota, but if you start letting states pass watered down garbage bills that actually don't accomplish their stated goals, it sets very bad precedent. It's hard to fix. And so we have the opportunity right now, hitting these links that we have included with this video, to fix this problem before it becomes any worse.
So in a nutshell, I'll just give the top 2 or 3 problems we have with this bill for those who are in South Dakota. The biggest issue is the lack of citizen enforcement. So this is House Bill 1052. It's in the House Judiciary Committee action on Monday. The problem with it is that it requires the government to police the government. The idea of citizens taking these agencies into court with civil fines, that is not present in this bill. Instead, local prosecutors, the ones who work with local law enforcement every single day, are going to be expected to sue those identical agencies for civil damages, and then for the second offense, a criminal charge. And while it sounds cool, and the idea of a criminal charge sounds cool, it is completely irrespective of reality. The reality is not a single prosecutor in South Dakota will ever bring a charge against the department that his office works with every single day. And
Well,
so
and,
by
and,
having
and if
that, go ahead.
and if you've ever really been involved in the court process, in any capacity, whether it's divorce court or something, anything like that, you can very quickly tell by talking with your own counsel how some of these people, they know each other. They all know each other. So depending on that system where they're all friends, they're all working together, for that enforcement, it's just it's not concrete at all.
Just anytime we ask the government to police the government, we're asking for failure. And that's what this bill does, is ask the government to make these charges against other elements of their own government. It will not happen. The other big problem with this is, and that's the big one, then getting into the details on this, it's $1,000 civil penalty. Now that might be enough for Redfield, South Dakota. That might be enough for other small towns that I've been in my life in South Dakota. But Sioux Falls will trample right over this, and Rapid City will trample right over this, and many other areas in South Dakota would trample right over this. And so by limiting these damages to more of a slap on the wrist, we're effectively not having damages there at all. The key, the power behind Missouri's law with those high bar of those penalties is the insurance underwriters become the real enforcement. Because when Missouri enacted this, all those departments across the state got a call from their insurance underwriters saying, if you want to maintain your coverage, you will, by gosh, follow SAPA law, because we're not going to cover you if you flagrantly violate this new law. If we don't have that higher bar in South Dakota, nobody is going to follow this legislation. And Chris, the last real problem with this is the final section. It's obviously written by some lawyers or those who have a lot of business with the federal government. It says this act shall not apply to any contract requiring the provision of assistance in the enforcement of federal statutes, regulations, or executive orders if it was signed before July 1st, 2022. So that is so wide open for abuse. That is so wide open that effectively we're going to have no protections for anybody in South Dakota at all. And again, as you mentioned, Chris, a minute ago, doing this like this, and we're not, and we're still working with lawmakers in Pierre on this, and we're trying to get some amendments drafted on this. So sometimes this is done out of ignorance. That may be the case here. Sometimes done out of malice. But either way, for the moderates who are in the Capitol and Pierre, not the drafters, but the moderates, they love this because they know how easy this is to vote on and then ride this to their reelection campaigns.
Well, and not to mention it raises some problems legally with it as well. We've seen a lot of different SAPA bills over the years in a lot of different states. I'm working on in Ohio and in Pennsylvania, and obviously all of the work that we've done in Missouri. But it really is surprising how they came up with this kind of legislation. That date pegging that happens in this bill in the proposal that's before us right now.
Yeah.
It leaves some real doubts as to whether it would even survive a court challenge because of just the arbitrary nature of it.
Exactly.
But then also the contracts that were made before that date, well, a lot of that stuff is tied to the Gun Control Act of 1964, NFA. If Congress would come in and change those, well, it's going to change the law as applied at the state level then, but then you have that whole date question. It's very confusing. And I know one thing in all my years of doing gun politics, when you leave confusion up to the lawyers and judges in what is increasingly a corrupt court system, it will be abused wholesale.
And it will be ultimately decided by the judges then who get
Right.
to, they will answer any ambiguities in the law. That's the problem. And
Right.
so I think for anybody who cares about the idea of state sovereignty, the idea that we're going to sit here and just say, well, any contracts we have with the feds, we're going to have to enforce them because this is insulting. This is South Dakota. Chris and I, we grew up 30, 40 minutes away from the South Dakota border. It is one of the freest states in the country. And the idea that we're going to subjugate our state level freedoms, our state level rights to a madman's pen via executive orders in Washington, D.C., it's insulting not just to states' rights, but to South Dakotans in general. And so there's a lot riding on this, folks. It's not just about gun rights or the Second Amendment. The idea of state sovereignty, of separating who's in charge of our states and making it clear to the federal government that you're not going to tell us what to do in our states, especially with our own manpower, our tax dollars, and our state property. This is a monumental issue. Now, Chris, there's other organizations we are aware of who are riding in on this, we're being told right now, and like the bill as is. And so it's important that AFA members who talk with their lawmakers remind them that I don't really care what some outside organization says. I don't care what some lobbyist who flies into town says about this bill. SAPA has 3 or 4 points, and if we lose them, the bill is dead. And this bill does not cover that at all. A lot of times after other organizations have been attacking the idea of SAPA, they love coming in for a win, but this is no win for South Dakota.
I wish things weren't this way, especially in gun politics today. Yes. I wish it was just this legislation, the problems with it, and what we need to do to fix it. However, you have this problem right now where there's other groups that simply want to be able to fundraise nationally off of this, and they don't care about the policy. They've never gone down 10th in Sioux Falls before. They don't know where I-29 is. And they just want the win. They want to be able to email their lists and say, oh, yeah, we passed SAPA, even though it does not do anything, even though it's a horrible version and actually goes backwards. They just want to do that. So we have to fight not only against the policy here, but we have to fight against all these other efforts to try to just come in and do whatever. So we're asking everybody, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we led this fight for Missouri in the Missouri Firearms Coalition, our state affiliate there in Jeff City. And we know exactly what a hellacious battle that was. It was not easy. It was a multi-year fight.
No.
And we fought like dogs with our in-state affiliate to make this thing happen. It was a It was just a knockdown, drag out battle. And that
because
is,
because you're fighting against everybody. You're fighting against the moderates. You're
yep,
fighting against the fake news media. You can bet that that old KSFY will be running some attack articles against it.
yeah,
You're fighting against the corrupt trial lawyers. I mean, these people hate the idea of the Second
right.
Amendment
This
Preservation
is the
Act because
level of opposition that we're dealing with, and so
right,
if this should be expected. If you see a state legislature pass SAPA and it just slides through like someone sliding off I-90 in an ice storm down by Chamberlain, then you know that this is not sufficient to the task. This is a major fight, and we this is the history of our country.
yeah,
Standing up against tyranny has never been easy. There's never been an easy road. There's never been an easy quick fix. But we have
no,
tyrants now in our country. We have tyrants in South Dakota, as we do in every state, and limiting their authority to enforce federal unconstitutional executive orders that are going to take effect. We missed this, Chris, taking effect this year
right,
on
right.
80% lowers and on AR-15 pistol braces. This happens this year. These fights are never going to be easy, but if we settle for a cheap victory, which is what this would be if this passes, it's going to have no teeth and no protection for gun owners. So guys, take a moment, hit the link beneath this video right now, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're seeing it, and contact the members of this committee. And again, like as Chris said at the beginning, this might be just out of simple ignorance, might be out of malice. We're talking with sponsors now to address this, but either way, tell them, fix House Bill 1052 or kill it, and let's try it again next year. We cannot take a cheap substitute.